Hi there, boys and girls. We are back again, and we're picking up that story of Christopher Lutkin. And I'm still dressed up. See, I've got to change. I had a red vest, but this has got fancy big buttons on it, and you see, I don't have the ascot, but this is a very, very expensive scarf. You would have to be a high-class macaroni to wear this, but I had my hat here, and with two feathers in it, and it says, but I'm going to take that off because real society people wear white wigs. So here I am. George Washington wore a white wig. King George III wore a white wig. All of the people that were important had white wigs, and I have a white wig. So when you see the picture of George Washington on a dollar bill or someplace, he's got a white wig on. And I'm as good as George Washington with my white wig. Okay? Fantastic. Now, we've got to get to our story here today. Because you remember last week, Ludwig was going across the water in New York City, going across the bay to talk to the Hessian soldiers because he was from Hesse. And he was going to talk to them about liberty, independence, and freedom. And he was going to speak it in German. That's what it's written here in German, along with the English. And he got over there and got there safely. He didn't get caught. And he's talking to the Hessian soldiers. And they're big, and they're young, and they're strong. And he kind of didn't know. He forgot his whole speech that he was going to make. And all he did was say, I'm a baker. But he said it in German. I'm a baker. And maybe they could smell the gingerbread on his clothing. And it said, or maybe in their imaginations, they thought about, oh yes, we had gingerbread back in Germany. And we don't get it over here. The English didn't know about gingerbread much. And Ludwig says, I bake gingerbread for our soldiers. If you come, I'll make gingerbread for you. You don't have hungry soldiers? No hungry bellies, no empty bellies in mine America. And I can say mine America. Der Schnick in mine America. See, that's what he said. Not in my America. There's not going. I don't know whether he convinced very many to leave. Maybe a few said we'll leave. But most of them stayed because they weren't sure about that. Well, he got in his boat and he went back across again, over across the bay to back to Brooklyn. Well, the next day there was a fight. There was a battle. Oh boy. And the Hessians drove General Washington and his soldiers out of Long Island. And they had to cross the river into Manhattan. And they followed in their boats across the river and were pursuing Washington. And Washington had to go across the Hudson River to get away from them. And they were doing it, trying to do it in an organized way so they didn't lose a lot of their soldiers in battle. They were trying to escape. And Washington outmaneuvered them. He's a good general. He outmaneuvered them and got he lost a few, but he got most of them across the Hudson River and into New Jersey. You think he was safe? No. The Hessians and the Redcoats were following him because they had many more. They had about 10,000, and Washington only had a little over 1,000, a few less than 2,000. That's all the soldiers he had in his army at that point. And he went across New Jersey with the soldiers. Now, when you got that few, you could move pretty fast, and they did move pretty fast, and they had to cross another river. They crossed the Delaware River. Now, it's cold. This is wintertime. It's December, and these streams are cold, and you had to have the boats, but they had come down. They had boats that they could get across, and the Hessians and the others came across in their big boats. And then they put their rowboats out. And so Washington got across the Delaware, the icy river, and into Pennsylvania. And they stopped. They felt they were safe. It was a long, scary. They didn't get to eat gingerbread while they were running. They had to get out of there and get safety. And so they did. And they stayed in Pennsylvania that night. Now, it's Christmas Eve. Do you know when Christmas Eve is? December 24th. That's what it is. Because Christmas Day is December 25th. And the Hessians were in a city called Trenton, which is right on the river on the New Jersey side. General Washington's on the Pennsylvania side. They just had to run. This is not going to be good news to the colonists if they hear that Washington had to run with his soldiers away from all the... It's going to sound like we lost the war already. So he says to the soldiers, we've got to get a victory tonight. So, this is a story that you may have seen pictures of George Washington in a boat going through the icy Delaware River, crossing over just above the city called Trenton. That's where the Hessians were housed, in Trenton. It's Christmas Eve. And they're having parties because they drove the colonists clear across New Jersey and fled in. And so they're having a big celebration. It's Christmas Eve and on Christmas Day. They're pretty well, partied out. And so Washington has got his men across the river and they sneak down on Trenton. And at daylight, Christmas Day, they attack. And they take the whole city. Because they had too much party. And they can't fight, they can't stand up, they can't do much of anything. And they've got all these thousands of Hessian soldiers that are prisoners now. Now the word gets back to the King of England that his Hessian army has been captured. And his soldiers are saying, Your Honor, Your Majesty, your soldiers that you hired keep disappearing. He doesn't have the soldiers that he thought he had. And you know what? Ludwig is going to make something special for the Hessians that have been caught. What do you think he's going to make? Gingerbread. Yes, he's going to make that. And because of it, many of the Hessians aren't prisoners anymore. They come over and fight for the side of the colonists. Because they like the colonists? No. Because they like gingerbread. And they like Ludwig. And he bakes gingerbread for them. And it helps to win the war. It wins some people over. Now, we're going to find out what happens after this. Okay? Next week, we'll pick up this story. But today, we'll tell you about Yankee. Yankee. Have you ever heard of the New York Yankees? That's a baseball team in New York City. They play in Madison Square, Yankee Stadium. They don't play in Madison Square Garden, but they play in Yankee Stadium. And they got that name. Now that's a term that again the English used to mock the colonists. See what it came from. And there's two ideas here. See, New York City used to be under the Dutch. Now the Dutch didn't like the English either. And they had a war with the English. And so the English didn't like the Dutch. And so when the Dutch would speak, they would hear them talk about Yankee, which means little man. All right, little John, little man. And so they would say, you colonists are just a bunch of little boys. Yankees. Yankees. And that was the Dutch term for little boy or little John. And so that's how they were called Yankees to mock them, as well as being called doodles, as well as being called macaronis, as well as being called dandies, as well as told that they didn't have horses, they could only ride ponies. And yet they took it as their own song. They couldn't sing it in New York because they were running away from New York, but they sang it at Boston, and they're going to sing it at Trenton as well, because they took it and they captured all those people. You got to take care of them, but many of those people are going to join the side of the colonists now and become part of that. And we'll talk about that more next week, okay? We'll have our prayer. I'll see you then. Father, thank you for this day, and thank you for the story of our people, our forefathers, even with overwhelming odds. Even with losses, they kept going. And they finally had some wins. And they had some more losses too. But they had some more wins. And and the soldiers that they captured who became part of them. It's a story of how we can show goodness even to our enemies. We thank you for that in Jesus' name. Have a great week, boys and girls. I'll see you next week. We'll be into August. Can you imagine that?